I want to bring in Sabrina Siddiqui. She's a CBSN political contributor and a political reporter for The Guardian. Thank you very much for joining us,
Thanks
Sabrina.
for having me.
So we heard there a little bit earlier about how the divide with the intelligence community and with the White House at this point on North Korea in particular. Do you think the White House has any concerns that the intelligence community is looking at this differently?
Well, I think the challenge here is that the president has, on numerous occasions, undermined his own intelligence chiefs or projected something entirely different because for him, it goes back to his own perception with the American public. And so his focus has been on projecting this image of strength and of success. And that's why you heard him talk about how ISIS has been defeated when clearly that is not the case, and how they've made great progress with North Korea when it's not entirely clear what the follow through has been since that historic summit took place with the President Kim Jong-un last year. We still don't have any clear indication that North Korea is willing to dismantle its nuclear program. So going into the next summit, that's of course going to be an area of focus. Insofar as whether the White House is concerned about the disparity here, I don't think that's really clear because, as always, the only person who's really calling the shots is the president himself.
And it's not crazy that a president, it's not just a Trump thing, that a president would have a differing take on foreign affairs from their intelligence assessment. I mean, we saw this under George W. Bush, Colin Powell, Tenet. I mean, this is not unheard of. But when you're talking about North Korea and moving ahead, is your assessment the White House is just going to continue with the summit?
Certainly, because a lot of this has to do with the showmanship, and that was one of the problems with the summit last year, where it essentially amounted to a photo op. Now, that's not to say that it wasn't groundbreaking insofar as it was held in the first place, but there were no preconditions. A lot of lawmakers on both sides of Capitol Hill, Republicans and Democrats alike, said that there should have been some preconditions for the president to even take the meeting with Kim Jong-un. And so I think you're going to hear some similar skepticism going into this next summit because there's no reason for the United States to actually trust Pyongyang and its intentions. And so the question, of course, is whether the president is actually going to take any of this into account or continue to pursue the headlines that will come out of that summit with very little by way of substance.
I want to turn to the Mueller investigation and ask you about Whitaker's remarks that this is wrapping up likely. Is that what you're also hearing from sources on the ground?
It's certainly consistent with some of the reporting that we've had, particularly when you look at the fact that Roger Stone was seen as one of the big indictments. But that doesn't mean that it's wrapping up in the coming days or weeks because there's no real definition of soon.
When is soon?
When is soon? Soon can still mean a few months. And just because the investigation may be entering its final stages, that doesn't mean that Mueller's team is not necessarily prepared to indict more people or that they can't still slap charges onto some of those additional charges to those who've already been indicted. But it's fairly remarkable for Matt Whitaker to be making that announcement when there's been a great deal of controversy already with respect to the FBI and the Justice Department sort of wading into ongoing investigations. And someone like Whitaker, whose appointment has been very controversial, who is seen as a loyalist to Trump, I think for him to be commenting at all on the status of the investigation was very uncharacteristic.
When you talk about making this report public, we've seen House GOP leaders come forward saying they'd like to see that happen. I want to play a bite for you from House Minority Whip Steve Scalise.
It's time that Mr. Mueller is transparent with the American people. This investigation was supposed to be about collusion between Russia and the Trump or Clinton campaigns, and whatever he's found ought to be released, and he ought to wrap that up once he's made it public.
Is this something that Democrats and Republicans are getting around?
Well, I think that they see it in different ways. This actually tees up what is likely going to be the next front in this process, which is once Mueller concludes his investigation, he's expected to deliver a report to Congress. And there is a debate currently over, or not even a debate, there are questions over whether William Barr, the president's nominee for Attorney General, is willing to actually make that report public. And he has declined to say under which circumstances he would make portions of that report public. That's something that could ultimately invite a legal challenge if, for example, the president tries to invoke executive privilege to withhold some of that information. And, you do have that bipartisan legislation that you mentioned. But, even though it's bipartisan, has Chuck Grassley, the former chairman of the Judiciary Committee, along with a Democrat. You had bipartisan legislation to also protect special counsel Robert Mueller and his investigation, and that was never actually taken up by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell on the floor. So oftentimes, even though there is some bipartisan agreement around where this investigation should go or how transparent the process should be, that doesn't necessarily mean it's followed through with action that actually challenges the president.
Nancy Pelosi, President Trump agree on one thing. State of the Union will be next Tuesday.
It will be.
Big deal, very big deal. They've actually talked. How do you think the president having that platform, the State of the Union next Tuesday, might affect negotiations for this next shutdown deadline, February 15th?
Well, it certainly does give him the bully pulpit and the opportunity to make a case to the American public. But at the end of the day, Democrats are now recently in control of the House of Representatives. And so Nancy Pelosi still has all of the leverage. In fact, the president arguably lost, whatever leverage he had to begin with by overseeing the longest government shutdown in U.S. history, the third under his watch, and coming away with nothing. He came away with zero funding for a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border. And so there's no reason to believe that he's going to get it this next time around. And there's going to be even more opposition, I think, if he was to try to take the country back down the road toward another shutdown when you saw, I think, unprecedented backlash to, what transpired over the last 5 to 6 weeks because of the billions of dollars of damage it did to the U.S. economy and, of course, leaving for more than a month roughly 800,000 workers without pay.
Sabrina Siddiqui, a lot to digest today. Thank you so much.
Never a dull day.
Never is. You can never complain that you're bored on this beat. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.